In these days of Muharram, leading up to the great sadness and yet festivity of Ashura, it's interesting to talk for a little about Al-Hussein after his death. We know that he was killed and decapitated on the field of Karbala. Probably it was a man called Sinan who struck the death blow, or who at least decapitated the grandson of the Prophet of Islam. We know that the bodies lay exposed for a period of time, and then the next day, which was probably the Saturday, were buried. We know that the heads were then transported in a very gruesome fashion, the heads of Al-Hussein and of his companion martyrs, transported first of all to Ibn Ziyad in Kufa, and finally sent by him to Damascus, to Yazid's palace. But there are some interesting stories about the transportation of the head of the martyr of Islam. His head was carried by a group of soldiers. We are told that they were fairly rough. They did nothing to protect the head. They did nothing to honor the head of the martyr. And there are a number of interesting stories that are told in the hadith that are worth recounting. We know, for example, that wherever the head was, and especially when it was put under a tub in somebody's house overnight, it radiated a great light. We know also that in a monastery where the group stopped, one of the monks embraced the head and protected it and honored it. The stories that interest me are the stories of a pen of iron that appears from nowhere and writes a warning on the wall of the monastery in which they are staying. So this group of soldiers stops at their first stopping place of the journey from Karbala to Kufa. Sometimes this is just a building of some sort, but sometimes it's named as a monastery of the Christians. The soldiers put the head on a spear and they sit down and begin to eat and to drink alcohol. And in the middle of the evening, a pen appears, a pen of iron held by a mystical hand, and it writes on the wall of the monastery, "Will the community that has killed Al-Hussein expect the intercession of his grandfather on the day of reckoning, Yawmul Hisab, the day when accounts are going to have to be dealt with?" The soldiers take fright and run away. But this story repeats itself over and over again in the traditions, this pen of iron that writes a warning against those who even carry the head of Al-Hussein and make a mockery of it. We know that when the head finally gets into the court of Ibn Ziyad, he himself mocks it and exposes the young children who are survivors to this gruesome sight. Later in the court of Yazid, he will try to shield the younger children from the sight of the head of Al-Hussein. But there are other stories too. There are stories of groups of Muslim explorers who go into Byzantium, Rome, and there they enter a church, and on the wall of the church, or in a book in the church, they see this same famous sentence: "Will the community that has killed Al-Hussein expect or even hope for the intercession of his grandfather on the day of reckoning?" The answer, of course, is no, they will not be able to expect it because they will not get it. But the monks, when asked, where did this writing come from, tell the Muslims this writing was here 300 years before the Prophet of Islam came. It's a prediction about the death of Al-Hussein, written in the walls or in a book in a Christian monastery for all the world to see. Again, it's an important story. Even if the details change from text to text, the message is the same, that if people are to hope for the intercession of the Prophet of Islam on the day of reckoning, the day of resurrection, if we are to hope for the intercession of the holy ones, the awliya, or of the angels, then we need to make sure that the lifestyle we choose to live here on earth is a lifestyle that is in communion with God and with his law, a lifestyle that is submitted to him, a lifestyle that never presumes that God will forgive us anyway, no matter what we do, so that we are free to do what we like, a lifestyle that treads gently on the earth and that does no harm to those around it, a lifestyle that is not so interested in its own quality of life, much more interested in the quality that our own lives adding to the lives of those around us. Every blessing to you in these days of Muharram.